More than 100 countries from around the world have agreed to more dramatic steps to put the brakes on global warming, mainly by reducing consumption of fossil fuels. To talk about the importance of the Paris Accord and what that could mean for the United States is our guest, the president of the Conservation Law Foundation, Brad Campbell. Thank you very much for being with us, Brad.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get to the essential equation here, because we know something's going on with the climate, but how do we really know that there's that cause and effect link between that and our consumption of fossil fuels?
Well, there's a broad scientific consensus that it's the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases we're emitting into the atmosphere that are essentially linked directly to global warming. Last month, November, was the warmest month on record once again, and so we're really seeing at the sort of man in the street level, people understanding that the climate impacts are already being felt.
And there's been a lot of sifting already about whether other causes might be in here or other cycles.
Yeah, there's been a lot of, I would say, faux science suggesting that it's sunspots or it's some other source. But really the weight of scientific consensus is not disputed, and it's reflected in the fact that so many different countries who have so many different interests at stake reach this core agreement that greenhouse gas emissions have to be reduced, and that's what we need to do to avoid the very worst impacts of climate change.
In the basics, what have these countries all agreed to?
Well, they've all agreed essentially to keep the increase in global temperature below 2 degrees Celsius and to aim to keep it 1.5 degrees below Celsius. What that translates into really is a signal that the age of fossil fuels has to end if we're going to avoid the very worst impacts of climate change. We have to transition away to a greener energy platform. Developing countries have to develop in ways that are unlike the way we developed in the 19th and early 20th centuries, in a much more efficient use of energy and much more reliance on renewable energy.
Well, here in Massachusetts right now we have this debate over the expansion of natural gas pipelines. Some people say that this is a bad thing. On the other hand, there are other people saying, no, we need them because otherwise the electricity is going to be too expensive.
Well, I think that's going to be the acid test for New England in terms of whether we buy into this notion that we need big gas infrastructure to replace the outgoing coal infrastructure. Every analysis that's been done has shown that, including the recent Massachusetts Attorney General's study, has shown that this new infrastructure is likely to be obsolete before it's even built, that we really don't need big new pipes or many new plants to meet our energy needs. We need to be smarter about the energy resources we do have. That includes some targeted storage, a smarter grid, and other ways to use the gas we are using more efficiently as we move toward an energy platform where renewable energy is dominant.
What about the business angle here? I'm talking globally now, because you have all that money that's tied up in fossil fuels, very big companies. I mean, can you really shift gears on that?
Well, I think one of the most powerful aspects of this agreement, as much as we want it to be translated into new policies that move us along toward more renewable energy, I think the most powerful signal of this agreement is going to be to the financial world, a signal that essentially new investments in fossil fuel infrastructure is a bad bet for investors. And I think that signal is going to resonate not just domestically, but globally.
But I mean, right now, there are people say, yes, it's going to be bad for investors 10, 50, or 100 years down the line, whereas you get people on Wall Street, they're thinking about the next quarter. So is that really going to convince people, you think?
Oh, I think that convincing is already happening. You see a lot of people who didn't bet on low gasoline prices, who didn't bet on the success that we've seen in the solar and other renewable industries. So I think that transition really is already underway, and the agreement that emerged from Paris is going to be a strong underlying of that signal.
Now, of course, what we've heard nationally in this country over the last few presidential elections, especially from the Republican Party, is that if you put the brakes on fossil fuel consumption, you're going to be throwing tons of people out of work.
Well, I think that's another version of this false choice that we have to choose between protecting the environment or the climate and having jobs. What we've seen in New England, especially where we have the academic sector, we have the tech sector, this is the area where the new energy ideas, the new economy is essentially being built, and where we have the resources to create those 21st century jobs. We're not going to expand economically. We're not going to have a sustainable future for our children if we think that just reproducing the old energy platform is going to work in this new environment.
We'll talk about the world politics angle here too, because one thing has changed since the accord that failed back in 2009 is that, in the earlier date, we were saying, why should we make any cutbacks if China won't? But China, for example, they're on a different track now.
That's the great milestone of this agreement, which is for the first time, the developing world and the developed world are really on the same page, saying this is a program, this is a goal that we all have to share and that we all have to do our share in meeting, or else we'll all be in peril. All of our economies will be in peril. And it is as much the economic peril as the environmental peril that I think is driving this coalescing of opinion around the need for action and the urgency of that need.
Well, a couple of hurdles here. One is getting the United States to observe its own part of the bargain here. I'm sure there are people in Congress, Republicans especially, who aren't going to like this. So how much can they do to stop it?
Well, Obama's Clean Power Plan, which restricts greenhouse gas emissions from power plants, that's a big part of the puzzle. The agreement that the administration struck with the automakers to progressively increase mileage from vehicles, the increased deployment of electric vehicles, all those elements are really in motion now, and they're not elements that require Congress to act or that Congress is likely to stop. And so, I think there'll be a lot of heated political rhetoric, especially now that we're in the silly season of an election campaign. But really, the economy has moved way beyond where those climate deniers are in terms of what's happening on the ground, what's happening in the financial world, and how our energy system is already changing.
Well, regardless what people agree to around the world, in Boston we have concerns. And what do we need to do in terms of resiliency and even just reducing our own consumption of what we generate here?
We have made great progress in New England, but we really have to continue that progress and not buy into these proposals to build large new gas pipelines to service the region. And one reason is because the proposal, at least currently from Governor Baker, is that the ratepayers should pay for those pipelines. The ratepayers, families and businesses, should pay for and absorb the risk that those pipelines won't be needed. And I think that's really the issue before us right now, is whether we're going to continue to have these policies that essentially tilt the playing field in favor of fossil fuels, rather than, as this Paris Agreement suggests, we should be going in the other direction, leveling the playing field and really opening the opportunities for smarter use of energy and more use of renewables.
Thank you very much for being with us. Brad Campbell from the Conservation Law Foundation.
Thank you.
In a moment, an update on meeting the needs for shelter and recovery programs.